in South America's absolute largest country. And actually, we're going to do it in a slightly unusual way. We're starting with a super simple, everyday language lesson, and from there, we'll zoom all the way out to get a massive macro view of an entire nation. By the end of this, you won't just know how to say where you live in Portuguese, you'll truly understand the history, the geography, the people, and the culture of the place you might be talking about.
So, let's kick things off with a question. Onde você mora? In Brazilian Portuguese, this translates to where do you live? It's a pretty basic question, right? But the way you answer it reveals a really fascinating quirk about the Portuguese language. And honestly, it's the perfect hook for our journey today, because answering this correctly requires us to look at how words interact with the literal map of the world.
Okay, so to answer that correctly, we have to look at this fascinating little grammar rule. You need the verb morar, which means to live. But you also need a preposition to say in, right? In Portuguese, that preposition is em. Now here's where it gets kind of interesting. Unlike English, Portuguese assigns the gender to almost every single country. Because the country of Brazil is considered masculine, it requires the masculine article o, meaning the. When you combine that neutral preposition em with the masculine article o, they merge together to form the word no.
And this tiny grammatical shift is actually pretty cool because it perfectly captures how Portuguese differentiates between a whole country and just a city. If you want to say I live in Brazil, you say eu moro no Brasil, using that merged masculine nu. But cities, they generally don't have a gender in Portuguese. They're beautifully neutral. So if you want to name your city, you just use the base preposition em. You'd say eu moro em São Paulo. It really highlights how the language treats this massive masculine nation versus its individual neutral cities.
But you know, when you use that masculine no Brasil, you aren't just referring to some name on a map. I mean, you are talking about a staggering 8.5 million square kilometers of territory. To put that into perspective, that makes it the fifth largest country in the world by land area. It takes up nearly half of the entire South American continent. It's just a massive, sprawling space that literally borders almost every single other country in South America.
Expanding our lens a bit, you might be wondering, where did that name actually come from? Well, it definitely didn't come from a grammar book. When early European explorers arrived, the official names they tried to give the land, like the Land of the Holy Cross, yeah, those just didn't stick. Instead, the country's modern name comes from the pau-brasil tree. This native tree produced a highly valuable, intense red dye that basically became the central axis of the early colonial economy. The name of the commodity eventually just became the name of the land itself.
And that early colonial economy, it really set off this dramatic, turbulent, chronological evolution. It all kicks off in 1500 when a Portuguese fleet commanded by Pedro Álvares Cabral arrived. For over 3 centuries, it was a colony. And get this, at one unique point, it was the actual seat of the Portuguese Empire. In 1822, it declared independence, uniquely establishing itself as an empire ruled by monarchs. Then, by 1889, a military coup dissolved the monarchy and proclaimed a republic. And finally, after various periods of turbulence and authoritarian rule throughout the 20th century, the current democratic constitution was proudly promulgated in 1988.
But here's the thing. This centuries-long timeline, it didn't just unfold on some blank canvas. It took place across an incredibly dynamic, mega-diverse landscape. I mean, beyond the world-famous Amazon rainforest, which holds the greatest biological diversity on Earth, the territory also features the temperate Atlantic forest, the vast Cerrado savanna, and the semi-arid Caatinga. Scientists estimate that this single nation is home to roughly 4 million distinct plant and animal species. It is literally an ecological heavyweight.
But who exactly are the people sharing this incredible environment? Like, who is actually walking around today saying, Eu moro no Brasil? Well, according to the official 2022 census, the population stands at an unbelievable 203,080,756 residents. That officially makes it the 7th most populous country on the entire planet. But despite all that massive land we just talked about, these millions of people are not spread out evenly. Not at all. In fact, the country is heavily urbanized. Nearly 87.5% of the population lives in cities. So if you practice your Portuguese and say, Eu moro em São Paulo, you are officially joining over 20 million people in one of the most highly urbanized concentrations on Earth. The greater conurbation of São Paulo completely leads the pack, followed by the iconic Rio de Janeiro with almost 12 million and Belo Horizonte with roughly 5 million.
And these dense urban centers, they are home to a remarkably rich ethnic tapestry. Today's demographic makeup was shaped by centuries of complex history. Indigenous roots, European colonizers, African heritage brought over through the tragic transatlantic slave trade, and huge waves of global immigrants from places like Italy, Germany, and Japan. If we look at today's numbers, the largest self-identified group are Pardos, or mixed-race individuals, at over 45%, closely followed by Broncos, or white individuals, at roughly 43%, and Pretos, or black individuals, at just over 10%. And you know, that incredible diversity absolutely extends to faith, too. Historically, this has been the largest Catholic country in the world, a faith that still holds the majority today at nearly 57%. However, the religious landscape is rapidly evolving. The Protestant demographic has surged to almost 27%, right alongside a growing group of nearly 10% who claim no religion at all. Plus, you see a really vibrant, unique mix of other beliefs, including Spiritism and Afro-Brazilian religions like Umbanda and Candomblé.
So, what actually happens when you get a diverse population of 200 million people sharing this massive space? Well, they forge a deeply unique national culture. Out of this massive melting pot of indigenous, African, and European influences, let's take a look at 3 specific pillars of this identity that the sources highlight: their architecture, their cinema, and the language that ties the whole shebang together.
You can literally see this identity physically manifested in their architecture. It's like looking at 2 different worlds. On one side, we have the classic Portuguese colonial and Baroque architecture. Cities like Ouro Preto and Minas Gerais were built during